Welcome to Dig Deep, the mining podcast. In this podcast, we go deep into mining news, hot topics, and live interviews with mining professionals and leading figures in the mining industry. Introducing your host, Rob Tyson, founder and director of Mining International and Mining International Executive, a leading global mining recruitment and headhunting agency.
Hi, mining community. Welcome back to another episode of the Dig Deep, the mining podcast, the show that brings you the latest insights, thought leadership, and stories from across the global mining industry. In today's episode, I'm joined by Jacob Deysel, who's the CEO of Critica, to explore the company's progress and ambitions in the rare earth space. Jacob brings a wealth of experience across multiple commodities and jurisdictions, and is now focused on building a project in Australia at a time where rare earths are front and centre in the global supply chain conversation. We're going to be discussing Critica's roadmap built around scale, simplicity and speed, and what really takes to deliver on that. We're also going to touch on the challenges of metallurgy and processing, competing in a market dominated by China, and the all-important path to commercialisation and takeoff agreements. And finally, we're going to hear Jacob's personal reflections on leadership, lessons from his career, and what excites him most as he drives Critica forward. Jacob, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
Thank you very much, Rob. Very well, thanks. Yourself?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. Right, as we always start these podcasts off, wondered if you can just tell us a little bit about yourself, about your career, how your career's developed. I mean, we can speak how you actually got into the industry, and talk your way through your career up to sort of present day. So I'll hand it over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Yeah, so I'm literally 2 months into this role with Critica. It's a very exciting role, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But my background, I'm a mining engineer with roughly 30 years experience, and that's really been, developing, building, and turning around mining projects around the globe. And I think that's what I'm bringing to Critica. So grew up in South Africa, started on the deep level gold mines. I then joined Rio Tinto, where I was general manager for one of their operations in South Africa. Then moved on, and I joined a company called Chem Resources, which was listed in London, or still is listed in London. And we developed a Moma ilmenite project in Mozambique, which today is the largest ilmenite producer. And then subsequent to that, I moved on, joined Uranium Energy Corp, where I looked after their South American assets. Did a bit of a stint on ASX as CEO and managing director for MRC. And I think it's really that probably close to about 25 years of heavy minerals industry experience, which is obviously a key feedstock into the rare earth element space. And so there's significant experience in this field, and that's logically brought me here. So very exciting opportunity with Critica.
Yeah, great. Why don't you just give us a snapshot of Critica as a business? I know you've only been there coming up to sort of 2 months, around 2 months. So I wonder if you just give us a snapshot of the company.
So absolutely. Thank you, Rob. Let me introduce you to the new Critica. We are no longer just an explorer in the rare earth space. Under my leadership, Critica is rebadging, and we're moving forward as being Australia's next rare earth developer. Now, our flagship is the Jupiter project in Australia, which is the largest clay-hosted rare earth deposit, and our basket is specifically dominated by high-value magnet rare earth elements. And as you would know, Rob, those are specifically the key elements that's driving the technology of the future. Now, I think if I could set out Jupiter differentiates itself, and I can summarize that probably in 3 words: scale, simplicity, and speed, as you mentioned that. And we'll unpack that a little bit more as we move through this. But we've got an exceptional team at Critica, exceptional project here, and we're commercially focused, technically credible, and we're ready with a project that is development ready moving forward at this stage.
Yeah, as you just mentioned about and emphasize scale, simplicity, and speed as Jupiter's roadmap. In practical terms, what's the biggest risk in delivering that plan? And if we look at metallurgy, capital markets, or even regulation, or even something else, I just wondered if you can unpack that.
Yeah, that's a good question. Thanks, Rob. In general, I think in my experience, many projects and companies probably have risk when it comes to those 3 points you mentioned: metallurgy, the capital markets, and then regulatory and specifically jurisdiction. So if we unpack that a little bit, to me, in my experience, again, it's extremely important to have a roadmap and a plan to set this out, and what's the action plan to address each of those. Now, if I look at Critica and our Jupiter asset, we have significant advantages here. And I think the biggest technical risk that most companies struggle with is metallurgy at scale. So how do you scale this up? And again, you would have seen we're addressing that through a number of parallel work streams that's running at the moment, specifically on the metallurgical side. So we've appointed, about 3 weeks ago, we appointed Ansto, Munitech, and more recently GatherQ, as we're working our way through our flow sheet optimization. On the capital market side, I think we're again very fortunate, as we are well funded for this metallurgical program, and we continue to de-risk and mitigate. And that's specifically, I think, the way that we're addressing the funding piece is it's milestone driven, making sure that we're moving the project forward. And each dollar we spend is to actually progress the project. And then just coming back to the industry, we've got enormous tailwinds in the rare earth space. This industry is not cyclical, it's structural and it's strategic. And there's enormous demand in this industry, and especially building up and shoring up this supply chain of rare earths in the West. And you would have seen there's been incentive pricing, like the Department of Defense in the US have put a floor price on NdPr, which is two of those magnet rare earths, and that's specifically for MP materials. And we can see how that has decoupled a grip that China probably had on this market. And then there's an enormous amount of funding and grants available for the right projects in the space. And we certainly think that Jupiter and Critica is one of those projects. And then lastly, just to touch on the regulatory and jurisdiction piece. Now, I've operated in South America for an extended period of my career. And there is a specific competitive advantage to have a project in a tier 1 location as Western Australia, where we are located. Processes are very transparent. We've got stable government. And I think that's significant risk mitigation, and also a specific competitive advantage we have with where our project is located.
Yeah, if we look at the metallurgy and processing, your beneficiation delivers 95% mass rejection and upwards of 800% upgrade. What unknowns remain as you scale to commercial operations?
Yeah. I think, drawing again just on my experience, is that, companies struggle to make that linkage between geology, metallurgy, and then moving that forward into the commercial space. And I think a key risk here is probably variability. Now, if you look at Jupiter, the asset itself is 40 square kilometers. It's an extremely homogeneous deposit. And that's very important from an aspect that it drives constant feed. It gives us predictable processes and predictable product. So that's an enormous benefit we have. The second aspect, I think, that really differentiate us is the difference between being a clay or an ionic deposit. Now, we are a clay-hosted rare earth deposit. We're not ionic. So that optimization of reagents and the costs, and costs are major factors really when you look at the specific metallurgical route. And being a clay deposit have allowed us to reduce the mass upfront by 95%, upgrade the feed grade from the resource by about 800% before we get to leaching. And that translates really in a much smaller footprint, which potentially will result in a lower cost, because firstly, lower footprint should translate into a lower capex, but also into lower reagents, lower water, lower energy use, and therefore lower OPEX. And then I think lastly, the aspect that, those unknowns is how do you integrate this flow sheet? And for me, it's that beneficiation piece that we do up front, and how do we integrate that with the hydrometallurgy and making sure that's a seamless process. And here again, the work that we're doing with GabaQ that we appointed about 2 weeks ago, they're doing a closed circuit pilot plant for us, where we're going to upscale this beneficiation piece that will produce a small sample that will then allow us to further optimize our mixed rare earth, or this leaching process, which will produce a mixed rare earth carbonate. So I think we've got a number of processes here that's addressing some of those unknowns which most companies battle with.
If we look at the rare earths on a global stage, China controls around 70% of mining and probably around 90% of refining. How does Critica realistically compete in such a market that's dominated by China?
Yeah. So you're definitely not asking easy questions, Rob. So I think my answer to that is that we are not replacing China. We are building a preferred non-China alternative in Western Australia. And I think that's extremely important, especially at a time when processors and these original equipment manufacturers, or OEMs, are really looking for traceable, ESG safe, compliant rare earth feedstock. And in this case, the product we'll be producing is a mixed rare earth carbonate. So I think that's an important piece where we are in terms of how we fit into this process. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there's enormous policy tailwinds here with incentive pricing. We see that Europe and Japan, Australia, there's a lot of funding and grants available. There's stockpile initiatives. And I think that is an enormous drive towards this custody of supply for the West. And we are perfectly placed to be a key supplier to the West and shore up this Western supply chain. Now, if I link that also to the fact that, we've been talking about low cost, we're in a tier 1 location, we have we're developing a very clean flow sheet here, and we've got exceptional low uranium and thorium, which all add significant benefit to the logistics approach and the logistic chain here. So I think we really set ourselves apart in terms of where we're based and how we can shore up the West supply chain in this critical minerals called rare earths.
If we look at offtake agreements with ANSTO and Minutech engaged on MREC, what are you hearing more from potential off-takers?
Yeah, look, I mean, for us, I think formal agreements and any, that commercial aspect is really going to be depending on producing a product and sample and specifications that's associated with this commercial product that we are looking at the moment, the mixed rare earth carbonate. And that's really the next step for us. So the work that ANSTO, as I mentioned, Minutech is undertaking at the moment is to do that leach work so that we can have a look at what the mixed rare earth carbonate product is, the specifications. And then once we have that really clears the way for us to have discussions with off-takers. And I think we've been keeping those discussions alive. That production of MREC is extremely important, and that's going to allow us to rapidly move forward and have more binding commercial discussions.
You've worked across multiple commodities and jurisdictions during your career. What lessons have you learned that you're applying to Critica now? And also, what would you do differently this time round compared to some of the past projects that you've worked on?
Yeah. No, that's a very good question. I think for me, a few things that stands out, and the first is keep it simple. Don't over-engineer. And probably the phrase that I like to use is back to basics. And I think sometimes we complicate things, and it's really keeping things basic and to the fundamentals. The second one is it's very important to de-risk very early. And I think the important part here is linking the geology to the metallurgy. And I think a lot of times companies rush ahead and not fully understand the geology, how that links to the metallurgy, and again, how that informs a very robust flow sheet. So I think that's the process we've been systematically, in a structured way, moving through de-risking our project. I think then the question is driving a process here which really sets us up to be a potential low capex and opex producer, and I think that's very important. So it's really focusing on that low cost and the innovative development route for the project itself. And I think we've already seen that with the advantages we have with this beneficiation piece up front. We've been very fortunate in that our geology allows that metallurgy link to the geology. The low uranium and thorium aspect is very important in the overall logistics and cost management. And then just being in WA, in Western Australia, in a tier 1 location, we are really in a location where we are infrastructure rich. We are very close to a port. We're very close to power lines, roads, rail. We're very close to a gas line. So all of this infrastructure is already there. And then we have potential off-takers very close to us as well. So I think our location really speaks to that. And that's just a function of where this asset is. And then having clear stage funding. We spend, as I mentioned, where we move the product forward, and we have a very clear discipline capital approach when we look at the funding side of it. And then, of course, I think having an exceptional PhD-led team is very important. I've got an exceptional team, 3 PhDs reporting to me. So for a mining engineer, that can be very intimidating sometimes. But what's very important is we've got a very good understanding of the geology, the metallurgy, and how we link that to the commercial focus. And that's allowing us to move through this process with the required speed and pace in terms of moving the project forward. And I think, overall it's a team effort. And I think that's the important thing from a leadership perspective is to build that team and making sure that there's that team that can deliver. And that's certainly what Critica has.
Being in Australia, obviously a tier one jurisdiction, I just wondered if you can give us an update on the rare earth space across the country.
Yeah, look, I think the thing in terms of Australia is always been seen as a significant ally to the West when it comes to critical minerals. And there's a lot of hopeful explorers out there with rare earth projects that want to move this forward. I think a few things for me that stands out as far as where we are is certainly the fact that we are the largest clay-hosted rare earth deposit in Australia. It's clay hosted, which therefore means it should translate into relatively simple mining. We've got a very large, consistent footprint, so that's adding to it. And then I think that the one thing that's differentiated from our peers is in the clay space, there's not many that's moved forward with this process of beneficiate first, reduce the mass, and then before you move into the leaching process. And I think that's a significant function of the geology and just how responsive our geology is to the mineralogy and the metallurgy of our flow sheet. And that to me really differentiates us amongst our peers in Australia, and hence I think being the next rare earth developer in Australia is certainly, I think, a title that we will earn in the next 12 to 18 months.
More on a personal level, what excites you most about building a rare earths project in Australia right now, and maybe some of the challenges ahead that you may have to obviously overcome?
Well, look, I think it's being part of something meaningful for me is creating a clean, secure, strategic rare earth supply chain in Australia. And I think that's about really leaving a legacy and being able to develop, one of the world's largest clay-hosted resources. That's very exciting. I think if I had to think about, the things that probably keep you up at night, it's like most CEOs, there's always this metallurgy piece, and it's the proof at scale, which is important. And we set out the programs there, and then it's just funding discipline and just making sure that we move the project forward systematically. But I think overall, Rob, there's more excitement than worry, possibly. We are really a very mission relevant, global aligned project and company. And it is about building that legacy, and that's based on really the three words we said: scale, simplicity, and speed.
Certainly. And lastly, what's the outlook for the sort of next 6 to 12 months for Critica? And is there anything else you want to share with our audience?
Yeah, look, I think it's certainly a very exciting 6 to 12 months. Key priorities for us is that we've got our metallurgical programs that's live at the moment. So ANSTO, Munitech, GavaQ are 3 laboratories, and we're running with those specific scopes of work there to produce our first mixed rare earth carbonate product, and that will be essentially the product that we will take to the market. The second piece is, as part of GavaQ's scope, is we're scaling up the pilot plant. So that's this front section of the beneficiation to make sure that we can produce larger volumes of concentrate that can assist us with this mixed rare earth carbonate optimization as we move forward. And then, being a mining engineer, very excited about starting a scoping study. So we'd hope to be in a position, to deliver a scoping study hopefully by the middle of next year. And that will really give us our first pass on economics and show the commercial pathway from resource to revenue. And as part of that process, we'll do a bit of drilling to upgrade the resource at the right time. And once we have all of that in place, that's going to put us in a very key position to start talking about strategic partnerships, OEMs, and downstream processes, and start to align, offtake and funding opportunities with that. So the next 12 to 18 months is really turning Jupiter from what we believe is a world-class resource into a credible development story.
Jacob, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate you giving us a overview of Critica and what you're looking to achieve in the rare earth space in Australia. If our audience wants to reach out to you, if they want to follow the story, ask any questions, how can they go about doing that, and what social media platform channels are you on?
Yeah, look, I think, thank you very much, Rob. It's certainly been a pleasure being on your show. I would probably send everyone to our website, which is Critica Ltd. Our ticker is CRI, and we are on most of the platforms, but the most information can be found on our website. We are busy rebadging our website, so that's another exciting piece to look out for. So maybe in the next 2 weeks or so, we'll have a new website as well running. So delighted for the listeners to go and have a look.
Yeah, great. We include those in the show notes, accompanies for easy access. So wish you well for the remainder of the year going into next year. And perhaps you want to come on the podcast sometime next year to give us an update. That'd be good to, if you're able to do that.
Would be delighted to. Thanks, Rob. Appreciate it.
No worries. Thank you. Thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed that episode. Rare earths obviously is an important a commodity across all the commodities. And obviously, as we've discussed, China do hold a lot of the rare earths, and which is obviously critical commodity needed for the battery revolution that we seem to be heading towards. So, important episode. Appreciate if you can keep sharing these episodes far and wide across the world and educate the mining industry. So thank you again for listening, and until next time, happy mining.
Thank you for listening. Remember to reach out to Rob via the show notes, and be sure to subscribe and leave a review. Until next time, happy mining, helping each other to improve the mining industry.